Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere warm and a little dusty, a small farm tucked behind a row of sleepy hills, the kind of place where crickets sing louder than cars, and the air smells like earth and wood smoke. You might not have experienced this before, but there's a certain kind of silence in the countryside that feels thick, like it's waiting for something to happen. Before we drift into the story, if you enjoy quiet tales with a twist and you'd like more sleepy diary entries like this, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that little bell so you don't miss the next dream. All right, now let's get into today's diary entry. I must have been around 11 that summer, the year I was sent to stay with my Uncle Eli, while my parents took a long trip overseas. Uncle Eli lived alone on a patch of land surrounded by golden fields and quiet groves in a weathered old farmhouse with green shutters that creaked in the wind. He wasn't what you call warm, but he wasn't mean either. More like a man stitched together from quiet habits, worn boots, and a lifetime of sun. The attic room he gave me was lined with the scent of dry pine and mothballs. The ceiling sloped just enough to make you duck if you weren't careful, and the floorboards groaned with every step like they had secrets of their own. It was on my third afternoon there, while trying to kill time between lunch and dinner, that I found the tobacco tin. It was tucked deep inside an old chest beneath a folded quilt that smelled like cedar and dust. I almost missed it. The tin was square red and dented at the corners, like it had been sat on or tossed across a field. It clicked when I picked it up, and when I popped it open, I expected dry leaves or coins, but instead, nestled inside some yellow tissue paper was a single iron key. It was heavy, cold. It didn't belong to any door I'd seen in the house. Its bow was shaped like a looped clover, and the teeth were jagged and uneven, like it had been filed by hand. There was a faint etching along the side, a symbol I didn't recognize, something like a spiral inside a triangle. Naturally, I showed it to Uncle Eli at dinner. He stopped chewing when I placed it on the table, and for the first time since I'd arrived, his face changed. Not angry, just still, like a photograph. "Where'd you find that?" he asked quietly. "In the attic," I replied, "in that old chest near the window." He nodded once very slowly, then pushed his plate away. "Don't take it outside," he said, "especially not near the cornfield." I blinked at him. "Why?" He stood and took the key without another word, slipping it into the front pocket of his overalls. And just like that, dinner was over. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind brush the side of the house. The attic creaked and shifted around me, and I could feel the weight of the missing key in the quiet. I couldn't sleep, not really. I just kept thinking about the look in Uncle Eli's eyes. The next morning, I snuck back into the attic. The chest was still there, quilt undisturbed. The tin was gone, of course, but there was something odd about the way the corner of the floorboard beneath the chest didn't quite sit flush like the rest. I pried it up with the handle of a paintbrush. There was nothing beneath it but dry dirt and a single matchstick. Nothing that explained the key or why it had been hidden. But still, I couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, I kept looking. The barn, the cellar, the shed behind the chicken coop. None of the locks matched the key. Uncle Eli kept a close eye on me in that silent way adults have, like they're pretending not to look, but they always know what you're doing. On the sixth day, I found him sitting on the porch with the tin in his lap, just turning the key over and over in his hand, like it might turn into something else. He didn't say anything when he saw me. Just stood, walked past, and locked the tin inside the drawer of his desk. But I could feel it. Whatever the key opened, it wasn't just a door. That night, I dreamt of a staircase going down and down, surrounded by walls made of corn husks and whispering shadows. And at the very bottom, a room with a single light flickering on and off. I didn't know what was down there, but I was going to find out. The morning after that dream, the sun came up slowly, like it wasn't in any hurry to be noticed. I sat on the edge of my little attic bed, still in my pajamas, listening to the low hum of cicadas outside. The light slanted in through the dusty window, catching particles in the air like falling stars. That dream had lodged itself in my brain like a stone in a shoe. I couldn't shake it. When I came downstairs, Uncle Eli was already out in the field. I could see his faded hat bobbing between the tall stalks of corn through the kitchen window. He never told me much about his work, and I rarely saw him out there. He moved like he knew every inch of the place, like the rows themselves bowed to him just slightly as he passed. After a quick breakfast, I decided to follow. Not right away, of course, I wasn't bold enough for that. I waited a few minutes, then slipped on my sneakers and wandered toward the cornfield with the world's most casual whistle. The kind of whistle that says I'm definitely not sneaking into restricted corn-related territory. The cornfield was huge, taller than me, stretching out in every direction like a golden maze. There were paths between the rows, but they twisted and curved so subtly you'd lose your bearings in seconds. Still, I wasn't heading deep in, not yet. I stayed near the edge just far enough in to keep an eye on Uncle Eli's figure through the gaps. I watched him kneel beside a patch of stalks near the farthest corner. Then he stood and walked in a small circle, almost like he was checking for something. He touched the ground briefly, then looked up and stared right at where I was hiding. I ducked. When I peeked again, he was gone. I froze there for a while, crouched between the stalks, heart tapping like a woodpecker in my chest. The wind shifted, making the corn leaves rustle with a sound like dry paper being crumpled. And that's when I remembered something strange. On my first day, Uncle Eli had warned me, don't go into the farthest row, not after dusk. Back then, I'd assumed it was one of those arbitrary adult rules meant to keep kids safe from imagined dangers, like don't run with scissors or don't eat berries you find in the woods. But standing there now, just a few feet from that very last row, the air felt thicker, like the rules were there for a reason. Later that afternoon, I tried to ask him again. We were in the tool shed sorting screws and nails into coffee tins. I casually brought up the key, pretending to joke. So what does it open anyway? A treasure chest, secret basement portal to another world. He didn't smile. Instead, he reached into a tin of nails, took one out, and placed it on the workbench. It opens the past, he said softly. And that's not always something you want to let out. I blinked. What's that mean? But he just walked out of the shed. That evening, I stayed up late in the attic listening. The wind had died down. Crickets were loud again, like they were trying to fill up the silence. And just after midnight, I heard it. A soft whisper, faint, like someone brushing their hand against the corn leaves and humming at the same time. The sound came and went, barely there, and yet unmistakable. I climbed out of bed and crept to the window. Nothing. Just shadows and moonlight and a sway of stalks in the far field. But the whisper was real. The next night I waited again. Same sound. Maybe it was just the wind, I told myself. Maybe the corn made strange noises at night. But by the third night I was convinced. It wasn't just noise, it was words. I couldn't understand them, not exactly, but the rhythm was too deliberate. Like someone speaking through water or through a wall. So I did something dumb. I took a flashlight, waited for Uncle Eli to fall asleep, and tiptoed out the back door in my socks. The grass was cold under my feet, and the cornfield loomed in front of me like a giant's hand reaching up from the ground. I paused at the edge, heart pounding, unsure whether to step in. But then there it was again. That whisper, clearer this time, like it knew I was listening. I stepped between the rows. The air changed immediately. It felt cooler, even though the night was warm. The stalks seemed to close behind me as I moved forward, brushing against my arms and whispering secrets I couldn't quite catch. I don't know how long I walked. It wasn't far, maybe a few dozen steps, but it felt like I was going somewhere deeper than the field itself. And then I saw it. A faint glint of metal ahead, something reflecting my flashlight. I pushed forward and found the scarecrow. I'd seen it before from a distance. A slumped figure with a straw hat and an old shirt, arms outstretched over a wooden post. But this time I was up close, and I noticed something I hadn't before. The base of the scarecrow's post didn't go straight into the ground. It sat atop a small square frame of wood just visible under the dry leaves. I knelt, brushed the dirt away, and found it a trapdoor. It had a brass handle, rusted and cold, and in the center was a keyhole. My breath caught. I didn't have the key, but I didn't need it to know this was what the whispers were pointing to. This was what Uncle Eli was keeping hidden. The farthest row, the trapdoor beneath the scarecrow. Whatever lay beneath wasn't meant to be found. But I had to know. The next morning felt different. Not because anything around the house had changed. Uncle Eli still made his coffee without a word. The sun still climbed lazily over the hills, and the chickens clucked like they were keeping secrets. But inside me, something had shifted. Now I knew there was something beneath that scarecrow. A trapdoor. A keyhole that matched the iron key I'd found. And even though I didn't have the key anymore, the memory of how cold and solid it had felt in my hand pulsed in the back of my mind. Uncle Eli acted normal, too normal. He even asked me if I wanted to ride into town with him for some feed. I said no, trying not to sound suspicious. I just wanted to stay back and read, which wasn't a lie. I did open a book, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window and the cornfield beyond. The moment I heard the truck rattle out of the driveway, I moved. The drawer in his study wasn't locked. I'd tested it before. I opened it slowly, careful not to let it creak. Inside was the tobacco tin, sitting neatly next to a stack of envelopes and a worn leather wallet. I took the tin, opened it. The key was still there. This time it felt warm. I tucked it into my pocket and walked out the back door like I was just going for a stroll. But I was aiming straight for the far end of the cornfield, heart pounding in that strange rhythm that only comes from crossing a line you know you're not supposed to. The scarecrow greeted me like an old friend. Same slumped shoulders, same tattered hat. I dropped to my knees and brushed away the dirt again, revealing the trapdoor handle. I fit the key into the lock. It slid in with a satisfying click. I hesitated just for a second. The world felt unusually still. Then I turned the key. The lock gave a soft clunk, and the trapdoor lifted with surprising ease, revealing a square hole in the ground, about the size of a chimney flue. A narrow spiral staircase curled down into darkness. The walls were made of tightly packed earth, smooth in some places, crumbling in others. Roots poked through here and there, like fingers trying to claw their way in or out. I clicked on my flashlight and took the first step. The dirt stairs were cool under my sneakers, and the air changed again, heavier, like walking into a basement that had never quite dried out. My footsteps sounded muffled, and above me the square of light from the field shrank smaller and smaller. I counted the steps without meaning to. 27 in total. At the bottom, the spiral ended abruptly in a short, curved hallway made of stone. Not just packed dirt anymore, actual stone fitted together with care. The air was thick with the scent of old books, candle wax, and something else. Something like iron. At the end of the hallway was a wooden door. No lock this time. I reached out and pushed it open slowly. It creaked like it hadn't moved in years. And then I stepped into the room. It was round, surprisingly tall, almost like the inside of a silo. The ceiling arched above with wooden beams crossing in a pattern that didn't quite make sense. There were lanterns hung along the walls, unlit, covered in dust. And in the center of the room stood a large wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs. Everything was coated in a thin layer of age. Cobwebs draped across corners. A chessboard sat at the far end of the table, frozen mid-game. One of the pawns had fallen as if knocked over in haste. I walked slowly, careful not to touch anything yet. The room had the feel of a place waiting for someone. Not abandoned, just paused. Against one wall stood a tall bookshelf stuffed with journals, jars of unidentifiable things, and small carved figurines. I brushed my fingers over a jar filled with what looked like dried herbs, or were they feathers? And then I heard it. Not a whisper, not like the ones in the field. This was a sound, a click like something being reset. I turned toward the table. The chair nearest me had shifted slightly, just a hair. My flashlight flickered. I moved closer and ran my fingers along the table's surface. It was smooth except for a set of initials carved into one corner. Emesser, Ame, Uncle Eli. I wasn't sure what I expected to find down there. Maybe tools, maybe a hidden shelter, maybe just some old supplies. But this was something else. This was a room, a private, thoughtful space, a place someone had spent years building in secret. And then I noticed something else, a small closed drawer built into the base of the table. I knelt, tugged it open. Inside was a book, not thick, maybe 100 pages bound in worn leather. No title on the cover. I opened it carefully, flipping through the first few pages. The handwriting wasn't mine, but the first entry began with my name, my full name. The handwriting was precise, looping, and old-fashioned. It described things that had happened, conversations I'd had, small things I'd done, even what I was wearing the day I found the key. I kept flipping, heart racing. About halfway through, the entries stopped being about what had happened and started talking about what would. Things I hadn't done yet, places I hadn't gone. Some of it seemed random, harmless, but some of it, I closed the book gently, suddenly aware of how loud my breathing had become. I was in a room my uncle had built beneath a scarecrow, holding a diary that predicted my actions. And somewhere above me, the corn shifted in the wind. When I climbed back up the staircase, the light stung my eyes. The square of sky above had dimmed with late afternoon sun, and the corn stalks around the trapdoor looked taller somehow, like they'd been growing while I was gone. I stood there for a moment, halfway out of the earth, just breathing. The diary was still tucked under my arm, heavy and quiet, like a sleeping animal. I hadn't read the whole thing. I couldn't. It had started to feel like I was peeking into something not meant to be seen all at once, like eating too much honey and realizing halfway through it might have gone bad. I closed the trap door, carefully brushed some dirt back over it with my shoes, and straightened the scarecrow's coat out of pure instinct. It flapped in the breeze, lazy and limp, and I swore for just a second I saw one of its fingers twitch. But maybe that was just the wind, or maybe it was something else. By the time I got back to the house, Uncle Eli's truck was already in the driveway. He was standing on the porch, arms crossed, hat low over his eyes, not angry, not yelling, just waiting. I stopped halfway across the yard, unsure whether to confess or pretend nothing had happened. "You went into the corn," he said simply. I swallowed. "Yeah." "You went to the scarecrow." I nodded, heart thudding. He didn't say anything else, just turned and walked inside. I followed, barefoot and sheepish, still clutching the diary. In the kitchen, he sat at the table and motioned for me to do the same. I pulled out a chair and sat, placing the diary on the wood between us like an offering. He looked at it for a long time, then at me. "Did it speak to you?" he asked. The question startled me. "No, I mean not out loud." He nodded slowly. "But it showed you something?" "Yes." He exhaled through his nose and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling as if it could explain everything. "You weren't supposed to find it yet," he said after a long pause. "It's not dangerous exactly, just early." I didn't know what that meant, so I waited. He reached over and opened the book, flipped to the last entry, the one I hadn't read yet, and then without reading it himself, he closed it again. "I built that room when I was your age," he said. "Not the trap door, not the staircase, just the space. There was already a hollow under the field. My father said the earth liked to curl up around secrets. I didn't speak. It started with sketches, he went on. Then tools. Then a place to sit and think. But the diary, that came later. I didn't write it. Neither did my father. It just appeared one day, with our names in it. He pointed at the cover. Every time someone opens it, it writes a little more. It watches, it remembers. Sometimes it guesses. I felt a shiver run up my arms. Is it magic? He laughed, not mockingly, just tired. Not the storybook kind, more like the old kind. The kind people forgot how to name. The kitchen ticked with the sound of the wall clock. Outside, a breeze stirred the chimes on the porch into a soft, eerie melody. So what do I do with it, I asked. That's up to you, he said. Most folks in our family chose to leave it alone. Let it fade. But some listened too closely. Listened. Sorry warning Kariwarn. Uncle Eli stood and walked to the sink, pouring himself a glass of water. The diary never lies, he said. But it doesn't always tell the whole truth either. It gives you pieces, a thread. Pull on it long enough, you might lose your way. I looked at the book again. Something about it still pulled at me, like it wanted to be read. Like it had waited years for someone to carry it back into the light. I didn't mean to find it, I whispered. I know, he said softly, but sometimes it means to find you. That night, I slept with the diary on the nightstand. I didn't open it again, not yet, but I could feel it there even with my eyes closed. Like a candle burning in the dark part of the room. I dreamt of cornfields again, but this time I wasn't alone. There was someone else beside me, tall, wearing a hat just like Uncle Eli's. But when I turned to look, their face was hidden in shadow. They held a lantern in one hand, and in the other, the diary. They didn't speak. They just pointed toward the staircase, and I began to descend. The next day came with a haze, not just in the sky, though it was cloudy, but in my head. I moved through the morning like I was underwater, as if the dream had followed me out of sleep and was still tugging at the edges of my thoughts. Uncle Eli didn't mention the diary. He made pancakes like it was any other morning, hummed an old tune while flipping them in the skillet. But every so often, I caught him glancing at me just briefly, like he was waiting for something to happen. After breakfast, I walked out to the field again, this time not sneaking. I didn't go far, just stood at the edge and stared toward the scarecrow. It looked smaller in the daylight, almost silly, but I knew what lay beneath its tattered sleeves. The staircase, the room, the diary. That afternoon, after Uncle Eli went into town again, this time to pick up spare parts for the tractor, I made my decision. I slipped the key into my pocket, took a flashlight, and returned to the trapdoor. The dirt came away easily. It felt like the ground remembered me. The lock clicked without resistance. The hinges didn't even groan. This time, as I descended the spiral staircase, I counted slower. Touched the wall with one hand. Let the earthy scent fill my nose. 27 steps. The air got cooler with each one. Still no spiders, no cobwebs, almost like nothing else lived down here. I reached the hallway, the same lanterns, the same stone. The door at the end stood slightly ajar this time, as though it had been waiting for me. I pushed it open. The room was exactly as I'd left it, but something about it felt more alive. I know that sounds strange, but it was like the air was aware of me, like the walls were holding their breath. I walked to the table, set the flashlight down, and pulled out the drawer. The diary was there, of course, open to a fresh page. The ink had already dried. It said, "Today he will write something of his own." I stared at those words for a long time. Then, without fully understanding why, I picked up the pen that lay beside it. It was an old fountain pen, heavy, still full of ink. I hesitated, thinking maybe it was a test, a trap, or a trick. But then I wrote, "I don't know what I'm doing." And just like that, the words shimmered. Just a faint ripple like heat rising off pavement. The ink didn't smudge, but for a second the letters seemed to breathe. I added another line. My name is Eli's nephew. And then I stopped, because something else had changed. The room. The lanterns. They were glowing, all six along the walls. Not bright, just enough to push the shadows back a little. Enough to let me see what I hadn't noticed before. The carvings. Symbols etched into the wooden beams high above. Spirals. Circles inside squares. A shape that looked like an eye without a pupil. I stood slowly, holding the diary in both hands. One of the chairs at the table had moved again, this time farther back, as if inviting me to sit. I did. The chair didn't creak. It fit me somehow, like it had always been waiting. I looked around, took in the silence, then wrote again. The air smells like the past. I feel like I've been here before, but I know I haven't. And this time something answered. Not in words, in feeling. A wave of warmth moved through the room like the moment before thunder when the air thickens with meaning. The diary's pages flipped themselves slowly, 3, maybe 4, before settling on another blank space. I leaned in. My flashlight flickered. And then on its own, another line appeared. The door's open. He must choose whether to leave it that way. I read it again and again. Because this time it wasn't about the trap door outside. It was about this place, this room beneath the corn, the diary, the symbols, the feeling that somehow I had tapped into something older than my uncle's farm, older than even my family's memory. I stayed for what felt like hours. But when I climbed the stairs and emerged back into the field, the sky hadn't changed. No time had passed. Not 1 minute. And I realized something. The room didn't exist within time. It waited beneath it. The first thing I noticed when I came back up from the trap door was the silence. Not just a lack of sound, but a presence. A silence so thick it felt like it had weight. The cornstalk stood still, not even twitching in the breeze. Even the usual chatter of birds had vanished. I shut the door quietly, pressing the earth down again with my palms. The scarecrow loomed above its hat, tilted like it had been listening the whole time. I tried not to meet its button eyes. Walking back to the house, I felt like I was being watched. Not in a scary way, more like when you walk into a room and someone pauses mid-conversation because they were just talking about you. Inside, Uncle Eli was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. He didn't look up when I entered, just took a sip and set the cup down carefully. I wrote in the diary, I said, standing in the doorway. He nodded slowly, I figured. I stepped closer. The room changed when I did. It does that, he said. I took the seat across from him. Do you remember your first time? He looked at me for a long moment. Yeah, I remember. What happened? I wrote something I shouldn't have, he said, and the room remembered. That answer settled over me like a blanket that didn't quite cover my feet. I wanted to ask more, but something in his voice made me stop. Instead, I asked, do the carvings mean anything? He blinked. You saw the ceiling? I nodded. He rubbed a hand across his face, then reached for a drawer beneath the table. From it, he pulled out a faded manila folder and set it between us. Inside were old papers, yellow diagrams, drawings of symbols, and a page that looked like a family tree, but had names crossed out, some circled, some marked with little spirals. He tapped the paper. That's everyone who ever wrote in it, he said. That we know of. I followed his finger along the tree. My name wasn't there, but there was a space blank and waiting. And these, I pointed to the spirals. Those are the ones who kept going, he said. The ones who didn't stop after the diary started answering back. I hesitated. What happened to them? His jaw tightened. Some left, vanished. Others stayed, but not really. They became part of the place. Like the room pulled something out of them and kept it. I leaned back in the chair. The air in the kitchen felt heavier than the room underground. But it's not cursed, he added suddenly. It's not evil. It's just hungry, curious. I didn't know what to say to that. He poured me a cup of tea, handed it over without a word, then stood and walked out to the porch. I stared at the folder a while longer. The names, the spirals, the penciled notes beside some entries. Wrote too often, disappeared 1937, refused to continue. I flipped the folder closed. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, the diary on my lap, open to the last page I'd written. The sentence lingered there. The door's open. He must choose whether to leave it that way. I took the pen again and wrote, I want to know more. The words didn't shimmer this time. They hummed. Not out loud, but in my chest, like a tuning fork inside my ribs. I felt them settle like my bones were reading along. And then the pages turned, one by one, until they stopped. There was a new page, blank, and then slowly, line by line, words began to appear. He returns to the room, but this time he won't be alone. I stared at the page, waited. Nothing else came. I closed the book, but the words wouldn't leave my mind. Not alone. The next afternoon, after making up an excuse about walking the fence line, I headed back to the trap door again. It opened like it always had. The stairs welcomed me with their quiet curve. The stone hallway was just as I remembered. But when I reached the door at the end, it was already open. And inside the room, the lanterns were lit. All 6. The chessboard was different too. Someone had made a move. A white bishop that hadn't been there before. I stepped closer and froze. In the chair across from the table sat someone, or something. It looked like me. Same clothes, same haircut, same freckle on the wrist. But the eyes were older, wiser, and somehow hollow. I looked up and said, "You kept the door open." I stood frozen at the threshold. The version of me across the table in my chair and my face watched with a calmness that felt unnatural. He didn't blink much, didn't shift in his seat, just sat there, hands resting neatly on the table, as if he'd been waiting for a long time. Or maybe never left. The lanterns on the walls glowed warmer than ever before, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe with each flicker. The chessboard lay between us like a quiet dare. He nodded once. "You left the door open. That's how I got here." My throat was dry. I managed to croak out, "Are you me?" He tilted his head slightly. "Not exactly, but I remember what you remember. And I know what you will." I didn't move. My legs didn't trust the floor anymore. I came from one of the pages. He continued, gesturing toward the diary now open on the table. "A version of you who kept writing, kept coming back, until I stopped needing paper to exist." I stepped into the room slowly, cautiously. The temperature didn't drop, but the air felt thicker. Not dangerous, just ancient. Like I had stepped into a moment that had always been waiting for me. "Why are you here?" I asked. "To give you a choice," he said. He placed a hand on the diary. "This place offers 2 kinds of people something. Those who fear being forgotten, and those who want to remember everything. Most folks don't get both. And you?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I tried to be both, and now I'm neither." A silence passed between us. The chessboard seemed to lean into it. He gestured at the board. "We've been playing this game for years. Every time you open the diary, a move is made. Some small, some permanent." I stepped forward and looked at the pieces. He wasn't lying. My side of the board was arranged exactly how I remembered it from past visits. But now his side had new moves. A subtle progression, a shift in the game I hadn't even known I was playing. He tapped one of the pawns. "This one moved the day you asked Uncle Eli if the diary was magic. That bishop advanced when you asked what happened to the others. And if I stopped playing," I asked. He leaned back. "You forget. Slowly. Until none of this remains. Not the staircase, not the room, not me." I stared at the board. Is that what happened to the others? The ones with the spirals next to their names? Some lost themselves, he said. Some walked out and never came back. Others stayed too long, left their thoughts in here and couldn't take them back. And you? I stayed until I stopped being a visitor, he said quietly, until the room knew me better than the world above did. I looked around the space. The lanterns flickered gently. The symbols carved into the beams seemed to shift ever so slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I moved toward the bookshelf. The jars, the figurines, they felt different now, like artifacts from different selves. And then I saw it, a photograph tucked between two journals. I pulled it out. It was me, standing in the cornfield, aged maybe 15, tall or older, smiling at something beyond the camera. And behind me, the scarecrow. Only it wasn't slumped. It was standing straight, eyes level with mine, and its hand was on my shoulder. I turned back to the other version of me. What happens if I stay? I asked. You'll remember everything he said, not just your life. The ones who came before, the ones who tried, you'll become the diary. That hit me in the chest like cold water. And if I leave, you'll forget, he repeated. The room will shut, the field will grow over, the diary will vanish, and you'll live a normal, small, forgettable life. I looked down at my hands, fingers that had held the key, turned the lock, written the first uncertain line. I'm not ready, I whispered. That's the right answer, he said. He stood. The chair made no sound. Then he reached across the board and moved a piece, a knight leaping forward. Your move, he said gently. And just like that, he was gone. No sound, no rush of wind. The chair was empty. The board was still. I sat, picked up the opposite knight, and moved it forward. The diary flipped a page on its own. A blank line appeared. I didn't write in it. Not yet. I closed the book, and the lanterns dimmed. I left the diary closed that night, carried it upstairs like it was nothing more than a heavy old notebook. No glowing runes, no whispers in the dark, just a book. Back in the attic room, I set it down on the desk beside the window and didn't look at it again. Instead, I opened the window itself and leaned out, letting the night air fill my lungs. The scent of corn and earth, of rain that hadn't fallen yet, drifted through the screen like an old song I almost remembered. The field swayed gently, and at the far edge I could see it. The scarecrow, just a silhouette now, still, watching. Sleep didn't come easy that night. My dreams had changed. No longer just the winding stairs and flickering lights, but memories that didn't feel like mine. A little girl with copper braids picking berries near the field. A man in 1940 suspenders painting the ceiling of the room beneath the earth. A woman whispering to herself in French as she traced her name in the diary. Their voices weren't loud, but they were there. In the morning, I tried to shake it off. Helped Uncle Eli with the chickens, swept out the barn, even tried reading a comic book from the stack by my bed. But the diary tugged at me like a kite string in the wind, taut and humming. Finally, I gave in. I sat at the desk, pulled the book toward me, and opened it to the blank page that had written itself last time. This time, no lines appeared, no shimmering words, just the blankness, an invitation. I picked up the pen. I spoke to myself, I wrote slowly, but he wasn't me, not fully. I paused, waited, nothing shifted, nothing responded. So I kept going. He warned me, he offered a choice. I'm not ready. Still nothing. That silence, the same one I'd felt in the field, in the attic, in my chest, it settled over the page like snow. I stood up, walked downstairs, and found Uncle Eli sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. He looked at me without surprise. You saw him? I nodded. Did he speak? He did, I said. He told me the diary wants me to become part of it. Uncle Eli stopped carving. Let the knife rest against the wood. That's true, he said finally. But the diary never demands, it only offers. And what did you choose? I asked. He gave a slow smile, small and tired. I left the door open just long enough to understand it, and then I walked away. I remembered who I was before the room. Is that possible? He glanced out at the field. Some memories stick harder than others. But yes, you can choose to live your life above ground. That afternoon, I tried to do just that. Went fishing in the creek, skipped rocks, counted clouds. But when night came again, the dreams returned. Only this time there were names. Names I hadn't heard before. Samuel Ely, Annabelle, Thomas Legrain. And each name was spoken in a different voice, but always the same whisper. We left the door open too long. I woke up sweating, the attic window rattling in the breeze. The diary was open. I hadn't touched it. I got out of bed and walked over. New ink had appeared, just one line. The scarecrow remembers the ones who stay. I slammed the book shut, took it downstairs, found Uncle Eli by the fireplace smoking his pipe. I dropped the diary on the table. I want to lock it away. He looked at the book. You sure? I nodded. I don't want to become someone else. I don't want to fade into that place. He puffed once, then stood. Walked over to the closet, pulled out an old tin lockbox from the bottom shelf. Put it in here, he said. We'll bury it in the tool shed. Will it stop? He closed the lid gently, clicked the latch shut. No, he said, but it'll quiet down, enough to live. And so just after midnight, with only a lantern and the hum of insects around us, we buried the diary in the tool shed's dirt floor. Piled tools on top, packed the earth firm. No ceremony, just the quiet kind of goodbye that means more than words. That night I slept without dreams. And for the first time in weeks, the field outside the window felt like just a field. Summer rolled on. The days blurred in golden heat and slow, quiet chores. I helped Uncle Eli mend fences, clear brush along the back trail, and once even learned how to sharpen an axe. We didn't talk much about the diary anymore. Not because it wasn't on our minds, but because we'd already said the important things. And maybe because we both feared saying too much would stir it awake again. Still, even without words, I knew he hadn't forgotten. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the corner of the shed where we buried it, pipe clenched tight between his teeth, the smoke curling like a question he didn't dare ask out loud. As for me, I did my best to be normal, whatever that meant. I whistled when I walked through the field, tried to count how many frogs lived near the creek, even mailed a postcard to my parents that just read "Farm's great. Still alive. No ghosts. Me." But late at night, when the house had settled and the wind had quieted and the crickets had found their rhythm, I'd sometimes sit at the attic window and stare at the scarecrow. And he'd stare back. Not moving, not whispering, just there. One evening, a storm blew in from the north. A real summer storm, big, wet, dramatic. Thunder like someone rolling barrels across the sky. Uncle Eli and I sat on the porch watching it roll closer, sipping lemonade and saying nothing. After the first crack of lightning, I turned to him. "Do you think the diary's really sleeping?" I asked. He thought a moment, then said, "I think it's waiting. Same as it always has." For me, he shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe just for someone willing to listen again. I nodded, then stood. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the storm or the electricity in the air, or that part of me that never fully stopped wondering. I went to the shed. Uncle Eli didn't stop me. Inside, the air was damp and thick with the smell of oil and old wood. I walked to the corner, pulled back the tarp and the rusted tools we'd stacked over the spot. The earth looked undisturbed. Still, I knelt, pressed a palm to the dirt, and felt it. A warmth, soft, steady, like something breathing, just beneath the surface. I didn't dig, didn't even move the soil. I just sat there a while, listening, waiting. The thunder boomed again. The shed creaked. And for the briefest moment, I swore I heard it. My name, whispered so faintly it could have been imagination. But it wasn't. Back in the house, I dried off and climbed into bed. The attic was warm and full of the storm's leftover energy. The rain on the roof had softened into a rhythm that could almost lull you to sleep. But I didn't sleep. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the sloped ceiling, and I thought about what the other version of me had said. The diary never demands, it only offers. So, what had it offered me? A glimpse of something ancient, a chance to see myself from the outside, a warning. Or maybe all of it, maybe none. Either way, I hadn't written in it again. I'd chosen to stop, to step back, but I also knew that wasn't the same as walking away. Not fully. Around midnight, I heard something on the roof. Not a bird, not the wind. A soft tap. Then another, like footsteps. I crept to the window and looked out. The scarecrow was gone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again, still gone. I ran downstairs barefoot, burst out the back door into the wet grass, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. The field stretched out in front of me. Dark, empty, but the scarecrow's post, still there, still upright, just no one on it. I stepped closer. The mud squelched under my feet. Halfway to the post, I stopped, because lying on the ground right where the scarecrow used to stand was the key, the iron one. The one I thought I'd returned. I bent down, picked it up. It was warm, too warm. I didn't tell Uncle Eli about the key. Not that night, not the next morning, not even days later when the field felt like it had stopped breathing and the birds had stopped chirping around the shed. I just kept it in my pocket, walking a little heavier now, as if I were carrying something more than iron. Every time I brushed against it, a kind of low hum ran up my fingers. Not painful, just aware, like it recognized me again. The scarecrow never returned. Its post stayed there, crooked and bare, with only a scrap of sleeve fluttering like a flag left behind in retreat. I thought maybe Uncle Eli would notice, but he never said anything. Maybe he'd already expected it. Maybe it had happened before. In the afternoons, I caught him watching me differently, not worried exactly, but cautious, as if he was waiting to see whether I'd break my silence. I didn't. Not until the night I heard the knock. Not on the attic door, not on the walls, but on the trap door beneath the cornfield. 3 short knocks, then nothing. I lay in bed with the key in my hand, turning it over and over until it no longer felt like metal, but memory. The next morning, I got up before sunrise. Didn't eat, didn't speak. I walked into the field. The corn was tall, now taller than me in every direction. The path I'd made months ago had vanished, overgrown with the slow patience of nature. But I knew exactly where to go. My feet remembered. At the scarecrow's post, I stopped. The earth was dry, the trap door handle buried again. I dropped to my knees, dug with my hands. It took longer this time. The dirt resisted me like it knew what I was doing. Finally, the handle gave way. The lock was there untouched. I slid the key in, turned it. The click was softer than I remembered. I pulled the door open. The staircase waited below. Same spiral, same descent, but this time no flashlight. I carried only the diary which I had taken from the shed just before leaving the house. The light inside the passage glowed on its own, now dim golden, pulsing faintly with each step. Like the walls remembered me, like the room had been saving its breath for this very moment. 27 steps. The hallway was warm, the door open. You're free. The room, alive. The lanterns blazed quietly. The carvings above now glowed faintly with a soft amber light, illuminating shapes I hadn't fully noticed before, some that looked like eyes, others like keys, and one that resembled a face I couldn't place. I stepped into the room. He was waiting for me. Not the hollow-eyed version from before, someone older, wiser, but still me. He smiled this time, not a warning, not a threat, just kindness. "You came back," he said. "I never really left," I answered. He gestured to the chair. I sat. The diary opened itself. A blank page waited. He didn't speak again. I picked up the pen and started writing. Not in fear, not in confusion. In understanding. I returned not because I was called, but because I had questions no one else could answer. The ink shimmered. The pages flipped. More names. More entries. And finally, at the end, a single sentence wrote itself in looping script. When you are ready to forget, close this book. I sat back. The warmth of the room soaked into me like sunlight on skin. I thought of my parents, my uncle, my room in the attic, the fields, the river, the summer storms. I thought of the scarecrow standing alone for years. Waiting, watching, guarding. I stood, held the book close, and for the first time I understood what it meant to leave the door open too long. You don't get trapped, you choose to stay. But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I walked back up the stairs slowly. One last look at the room before I closed the trap door. The key felt heavier now, more final. At the shed, I placed the diary back in the lockbox, closed the lid, and turned the latch. Then I walked out into the sun. It was a perfect morning. Clear sky, warm breeze. Somewhere in the cornfield, a new scarecrow had been set up by Uncle Eli, I assumed. Its coat was cleaner, its hat tilted differently, but its posture was the same. And this time I waved. Just once. It didn't wave back. But it didn't have to. That night I slept without the key in my pocket, without the diary nearby. And I dreamed of something simple. A porch swing, a mug of tea, and the sound of a pencil on paper. Nothing strange, nothing glowing. Just a memory, soft and human, and very much mine. Word count 100, relaxing conclusion 300 words. Summer faded as it always does. The days grew shorter, the cicadas quieter. The mornings came with a little more chill, and even the wind started to hum in a different key. The cornfield browned at the edges. The scarecrow stood steady. Uncle Eli and I didn't talk much about the diary anymore, not because it didn't matter, but because life had moved forward. And sometimes that's the most powerful kind of magic, letting things be. I stayed through the harvest, packed up my things at the start of autumn. He gave me a box of apples and a folded note with my name written in that looping, careful script. Inside it, just one line. Write your own story, not just the one that calls you. And I did. I didn't need a glowing room beneath the earth, or a diary that whispered back. I just needed the world as it was. Messy, beautiful, slightly mysterious in all the normal ways. That attic room, it stayed behind just as I left it. That field, still there, waiting. Maybe one day someone else will find the key, and maybe they'll make a different choice. But for now, the door is closed, and I am above ground, whole, soft, and finally, at peace. End of script. Sweet dreams.